The arts and culture scene was hit hard by COVID. How do we rebuild the arts community and make it more sustainable? I'm here today with Celia Smith, President and CEO of Luminato Festival Toronto. This is going to be an awesome conversation. Hi.
Hey, no pressure.
No pressure. You're awesome. This is going to be such a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today. I wanted to start off as a former museum educator. I think your career path is extraordinary, and I feel so confident that we are heading in the right direction with you at the helm of everything and anything that you do. So I just wanted to get that out of the way, because as someone who worked at the Smithsonian and I came back to Toronto, I really wanted to stay in it, but I get to do lots of cool things. So for you, can we talk about your journey? Because you've done a lot of great things.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I've worked most of my life in Toronto, and most of it in the arts, which is unusual. As you say, it's hard to stick to it. So, but I've had some great times and some great opportunities. So it's been amazing. A long time ago, I did an MBA, mostly because I had an English degree and I wasn't sure what to do with it at the time. And so I thought I should figure out what are they all talking about? So I did my business degree, and coming out of that, headed right into the arts. I looked at my colleagues and they were going to work for banks and consumer products. And I thought, I don't want to do that. So I worked for the McMichael Gallery in Kleinburg.
I love the McMichael.
Yeah, it's beautiful in the woods. It was wonderful. The collection is great. I thought, oh my God, I'm in my 20s. I'm dying up here in Kleinburg. I've got to get down to the city. So
for sure.
Nothing against the organization. It was a wonderful place to work. But after a couple of years, I thought, I have to get into the city. So I went to Canadian Stage Company. It's theater, one of the biggest theaters in town. And I ended up raising fundraising and marketing and all kinds of beautiful things. And we commissioned hundreds of new Canadian plays and worked with playwrights and artists across the country. And I did that in total for about 15 years. Ended up as the general manager and produced a ton of theater. We toured stuff around the world.
Yeah.
So that it was a great time. Worked with really talented, wonderful people. It was also, stupid hard.
It is 100%. Yeah. I think, the creative mind and then the nuts and bolts of sustainability, for some reason, it seems to be a pairing that isn't always natural, but you've done it. Mm-hmm. And then let's talk about how you got into Artscape. Because I think that's really innovative. You made a lot of stuff happen.
So when I was done, I thought, I can't sell another ticket. I don't want to do this anymore. I joined my friend Tim Jones, who was running Artscape and building it at the time. So he was the CEO, I was the president, and I was there for almost a decade, and we built 11 buildings, 11 projects while I was there. And many of them were affordable housing projects, so affordable rental and affordable ownership for artists and their families all across the city. So that was amazing, hundreds of units. Yeah. That was really good work. And then we also did community hubs. Yeah. So Daniel Spectrum in Regent Park, or Artscape Young Place, the old Shaw School. I came in just as the Witchwood Barns was opening. Amazing site, so interesting. And so we co-located all of these different arts organizations and community organizations into sites that also had event spaces, so people could do their community events and their arts organization events in these spaces as well. We built theaters, dance studios, art galleries, usually had some coffee shop or some place to eat in the middle of all of it, because that's how you connect to people. And programs to engage kids and mentorship programs and how to inspire kids, not exclusively to have careers in the arts, although some of them would, but also just to help them find themselves and their own spirit and their own voice. So we built those with community in partnership with the city and with various developers. In the case of Regent Park, with Toronto Community Housing, and with community members. Figured out how to build these things. And there's lots to talk about there, about the the ups and the downs and the challenges, but really great work and legacy work. Now, we are going to talk, no doubt, about Artscape is now facing some huge headwinds. So, everything has a cycle, but that was great work.
Yeah.
And I met, thousands of people through that in communities all across the city who were interested in building things and making things that would outlast us and changing the dynamic of the arts and culture sector that, we're just, we enliven places and then gentrification comes and we get booted out and we move to the next. And that absolutely happens and has happened all over the city and still happens. But trying to sort of fight against that, trying to set up opportunities to actually recognize the value that artists bring to a community. And part of that is building places for them to stay in the community.
Absolutely.
And not just lose out.
Absolutely. That's so important, right? Yeah. Queen Street West was not what it was, right? And it was the artists that made it cool. I feel like every cool part of Toronto is a result of amazing artists who created a community, and then it gets gentrified.
Right.
And then they have to go find the next place. And Toronto's a hard place.
It's a hard place to live. You look at Yorkville, you look at Queen West, you look at Dundas West, you look at College West, you look at, where the Junction, Weston, we just keep moving
out and out. And where are artists going to be? We need a space for artists. Toronto's becoming a highly unaffordable city for the people who make it amazing.
Right. Both to live, but also to work. We've lost dozens and dozens of small music venues and large music venues over the last decade.
Yeah.
And they're not really, a few are being replaced, but not in the same quantity.
Absolutely.
The St. Lawrence Centre will be renovated starting next year. So for several years, we will not have the St. Lawrence Centre. So where are we doing the plays and the music and the other activities that happen there now? So it's really an issue. So at Artscape, we were trying to do that. And I'm really happy with the projects that we were able to make happen. There were lots of roads not traveled, lots of things that could have happened that didn't happen. The forces were against us. So, there's stuff to talk about there. But when I left that, I went to work for a colleague who was running a private family-owned development company, purely commercial. But we were trying to do, under his leadership, the same idea of multiple bottom line. So affordable housing alongside market housing, atelier space alongside commercial space, public realm, aesthetic, sustainability in a commercial model, and trying to prove that in the private sector, you can still address some of these major social issues, that you're actually a participant in this, not separate from it. Because we're all in this. Housing, affordability of housing is an issue for everybody, regardless of what sector you're in, public, private, community. So I was the chief operating officer of TAS, which is the name of the company. Fabulous work. They continue to do great work now in that field. So I think the solutions, the problems are so large, the solutions have to be so wide across, multiple partners and sectors. So that's what we were pursuing there. And now I run Luminato, which is like a multi-disciplinary international arts festival. And I became a CEO at the beginning of the pandemic. So it was really hard. It was really hard to actually be an international multidisciplinary arts festival whose purpose is to bring people out into the streets in June, which is one of the nicest months in the city, and see each other and connect to each other and be inspired by work of artists who live here and artists who live everywhere else in the world. And the stories that people want to tell are the stories of the world. We're facing all the same issues as everyone else is. So that's what I do now.
I love it. But I thank you so much for sharing your journey, because there's so many people who are young who love the arts, and then they're steered away from it because, you won't be able to succeed and it's very hard and it's very tough. And it is, most certainly, right? It's a path I tried. And I loved every moment of it, and I learned so much from it. I credit so much of my success because of being in the arts and learning how to take criticism, critiques, learning how to be better and have a curious mind. And so I think that your journey is something that so many people will find inspiration from, right? What are the opportunities? Where's the need? And being fearless and trying it. right? And so I appreciate it. Like, I appreciate that because I think it's inspiring for so many people. And you also teach as well.
I do. Yeah.
So I think that's something really important.
Yeah. I teach at Schulich in the MBA program. They have a arts, media, and entertainment specialization, but any of the MBA students can take our courses. So I co-teach a course with Trina McQueen and Peter Schneider, who are both fabulous leaders in the creative sector, more on the TV and film side.
Yeah.
And we co-teach these students who are from all around the world, who are in this MBA program at Schulich, some of whom are just doing straight MBAs, but we teach about the business of creativity.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about rights acquisition, or what agents do, or what a commercial theater producer's day is like, or what it's like in the not-for-profit world. So we kind of expose them to all elements where they might actually be inspired to apply their skills in the future. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great.
It is that, like the multi-pronged approach, like you've just bring together so many skill sets. And I think that's what the arts is, right? Like, this is why the arts and culture sector brings so much benefit to every person who experiences it. And Luminato does that. Like, I think it exposes so many people to arts without sometimes people realizing, like, oh, wow, is this a possibility? The endless possibilities. One of the things I wanted to talk about with Luminato, assuming during COVID, and now, we're a little bit out of it. How have you found audience engagement and the mandate?
How have I found the audience is coming back?
Yeah. The mandate to, be local, global, and reaching greater audiences, and the mission to kind of share creativity.
We did a project last year in June called Walk With Them All, which was a project that originated with a group of artists and started literally on the border of Syria and Turkey in a refugee camp. And Amal is a 12-foot tall puppet operated by 3 puppeteers. And you can see them. And she's this 10-year-old little girl, a Syrian refugee who's looking for her mom. And she walked across Europe to untold numbers of cities and villages and towns, and artists created works to welcome her. And people came out into the streets to welcome her. And the idea is about peace, the universal theme of peace and looking for home, and not looking at the situation as one that she would be a victim, but looking at the potential of this girl, looking at the potential of resettlement and refugees coming into community. And so this was really resonant in Toronto, obviously. Absolutely. Because we have, so many rich cultures and communities and people arriving here all the time from various places in the world. So we reached out to this group who up to that point they'd done it across Europe and in the UK, and they had one visit to New York. And we said, we'd like you to come to Canada, to Toronto. And so they did. And last June, we went to 15 different communities in the GTA. We went to Brampton, Mississauga, Scarborough, Etobicoke, downtown on the waterfront, on Bay Street. And artists here created work to welcome her to Toronto. And we worked with over 120 different community organizations, many of whom are working in the resettlement space, also Doctors Without Borders, War Child, others, Sick Kids Hospital, U of T, to welcome her. Well, the response was incredible. Tens of thousands of people came out into the streets. They would walk with Amal, and little kids and elders and everyone. And it's a theater piece. It's a theater piece to make you feel and build empathy, really. Yeah. And it's a wordless piece, so it can be anywhere in the world. And the fact that communities respond to it and build their own response to it and make it sort of site-specific is amazing. And the organizers said to me, make sure that we speak to power. Like, we want to talk to the kids, we want to talk to communities, but you make sure that people who are empowered to make decisions and policies also show up. So we did. We had corporate leaders, we had politicians, we had community leaders come and greet her. We had a beautiful Indigenous welcome at Nathan Phillips Square on the first night, after she had walked from Union Station up through the towers of power.
I love that. That's so
powerful.
powerful.
And people were coming out of their offices and coming and meeting her. And it was just, so we had an amazing time with them all. When she left, we were on the harborfront, down at harborfront, and she got on a little tugboat and headed off across Lake Ontario.
Oh my goodness. The vision of that.
It was amazing. And at one point we were doing a TikTok. One of our team was doing this live TikTok. She had 270,000 people on a live TikTok from wherever with us, walking with them all. So something resonated with people about this, whether they saw their own story or their grandparents' story or their neighbor's story or whatever it was, it really resonated. She's now gone on and she's walking across America. And I think this week she finishes, she's been walking for several weeks, 35 different cities on the American-Mexico border.
Oh, wow.
And she's walking into Mexico and walking across Mexico later this month. So that was a very interesting work. It was interesting because it was all across the city. We were able to work in community that perhaps didn't perceive Luminato as part of their thing.
Yeah.
We were able to work with a lot of community organizations, some of whom we had worked with before, but not all of them. We worked in schools, which we had done before, but not the schools that we were actually with this time. It was an art piece created by really talented, respected arts creators. The people that make the Handspring Puppet Company based in South Africa had built Warhorse, which was an amazing piece of theater that was played in Toronto years ago. Yeah. And if you saw that or saw it here or London or New York, those horses that made you cry when they died, even though you knew they were puppets.
Yes.
Right? So they're the same people that had done that. So for me, it was just this lovely mixing up of all of it. Now, we're not doing them all again. That was a thing. Time. But that kind of thing, the kind of thing where it matters if you show up. I've said to the team, I don't want us to be passive. I want us to, it matters if you, Lee, show up. It makes a difference to the outcome. Yeah. And I want us to feel that literally, but also, metaphorically, because that is what it's going to take, that it matters that all of us show up in community, on the streets, to hear our voices or to make our presence known or to help or to be part of something. That's really what's going to help us going forward, to find our own energy and power, and then in community find it collectively. So that was interesting. We also did some amazing work with several local arts organizations. Premiered Treemanisha, which was an incredible, it was a Canadian premiere of a Scott Joplin work that had been only occasionally produced in the past. Yeah. And with Volcano Theatre, which is an incredible local theatre company, and some investors from the States and other companies. And that show will go elsewhere. It was extraordinary.
As someone who's worked in the arts and culture, I always felt like I was always trying to defend the value of arts and culture and why it's important. Do you find that about how to get the buy-in and how to get the investments, like from the towers of power, about why we need to support the arts? Because it is often, from my personal experience, seems to be the easiest thing to say, okay, we need to cut back. Yeah. Where's the easiest thing, right? Yeah. I mean, because of course, housing, healthcare, education are very important, matters. But I also think arts and culture is just as important. Yeah. So can I ask you that question?
People ask me that all the time. If I was running the show, coming out of a global pandemic, I'd be concerned about our level of energy and our feeling of resilience and our feeling of cohesion. Because if we continue to feel apathetic and isolated, and that the issues of the day are so huge that I can't do much about it. What am I going to do? I'm just here in my house, feeding my kids or whatever. So if I was in charge of trying to figure out how to make a community, a region, a country, the world flourish, I'd be interested in tapping into that. And that's what arts and culture does. It expresses ourselves, it tells our stories back to us. It gives us a sense of humanity. It builds our empathy. It makes me think, I don't know anything about you, but when you tell me your story, I have a little bit of a glimpse into you. Yeah. And I understand that we are different. I also understand that we are so similar. Yeah. That we have such a similar emotional reactions to things or similar priorities, even though prior to that I might have thought, actually, I have nothing in common with you, right? So I think it's an essential ingredient. And if people don't know who they are, if they don't actually have some connection and respect or knowledge or enthusiasm about their neighbors literally, and their neighbors, further afield, then I think you've got a real problem. People don't show up to vote. Yeah. They don't show up to volunteer. They don't show up to innovate. They don't show up to be entrepreneurs and create new ideas. People who are in their guts creative don't get feedback about that. I mean creative as scientists, as coders, as architects, as designers, as visual artists. If you're not in a surrounding where you feel that's reinforced, it's, you can imagine a place where we kind of all stop thinking of new ideas.
Yeah.
So that's a problem for the larger group. And I think, that's a big mandate. And then you look at the arts and culture community, which is chronically underfunded, under-resourced. There's always a brain drain because, frankly, you can get paid a lot more working somewhere else and apply your talents in other areas and just go buy tickets, which is a good thing too. But so that's a large mandate. And we're constantly being required to also prove economic impact, tourism impact.
Yes.
Absolutely. And we should be able to stand up to that because I think that's valid as well. But I think it's really on the emotional side.
Yeah.
And you think about the great cities in the world that you want to go to, or that maybe you've been lucky enough to go to. Some of them you would go to because of their natural beauty.
Yeah.
For sure. Because you want to hike on the mountains or whatever. Yeah. Amazing. You can't replicate that. But the rest of them, why do you go there? Because the food is amazing. The architecture takes your breath away. Yeah. There's interesting stuff happening in the street. Yeah. You saw this amazing performer as you walked around the corner. It was like, oh my God, I love that so much. You go inside some of their beautiful places that have lovely things that you want to understand. You saw something that provoked you and startled you. And that makes a memorable visit, right? And you maybe understood a little bit more about the people that live there, maybe. Yeah. And you have and so later when you read about them, you like, oh, I actually have a little bit more empathy for those people or some idea of their history. That's how we encounter the world. So if that's what we do in our choices about where we go, why don't we actually think about where we live the same way?
100%.
Yeah.
It's experiences. Like I find that as a parent, as an adult, it's what do you want to do on a Friday night? You want to have an experience.
Yeah.
Right. And something that captures your emotion, that's thought provoking or something like that enlivens you, that enriches you. Yeah. And this is where the world that we live in, our immediate city, is so important. And why wouldn't we want to be a place that we live?
Yeah. It also, if there's something happening in the park up the street, then that park isn't empty at night. It's actually full of people, right? And people, maybe you know them, maybe you don't know them, maybe you'll meet them. If downtown, if nothing's going on downtown and the squares are empty, you're not so comfortable being down there. If there's stuff happening, if you hear music playing, then it feels like, oh, I'm part of something. Yeah. And there are people here. We're all part of something that's going on. So I could go on and on about that. I also think that, like, to wire our brains, if you want to get specific.
Yes.
If you've raised kids, you know that music lessons, art lessons, dance lessons help them build confidence, help them build strength in their bodies, along with hockey and basketball and all of that good stuff. It helps them build confidence in their bodies and express themselves. Maybe if they're shy, it helps them get out of that shyness or at least have a voice that they wouldn't otherwise. It also hardwires your brain. If you learn music early on, your brain, math is related to your math skills.
Absolutely.
We know 100%. This. So that's just a really practical thing. So we do that when the kids are little. We're like, get them into those lessons, because we're focused on our job as parents to really optimize all of their abilities. So why as adults do we not see that actually these experiences can continue to stimulate us, keep us alert, keep us interested? I think that, it's not that everyone wants to be a professional dancer. That's not everyone's path.
No.
But to actually still remain engaged in those who do, why wouldn't we think that was positive?
I agree with you. And I'm just thinking about how do we support the arts, right? Like as citizens, as community, as government, right? As business people, how do we support the arts? Like, there are certain challenges because, as you had mentioned earlier, you can make a lot of money doing something else that might be more stable. Right. And that's why a lot of people who have those interests, whether it's, just out of interest, but they won't become that professional ballerina because the standards are extremely high, right? It's very competitive. But from that love of an art form, of the experiences, what can we do to support the arts? How can we support the community?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's some very specific things. You can buy tickets. You can go and see things. You can buy tickets. You can take your kids. You can take your friends who maybe don't go to those things normally. If you're going to buy a subscription of 2, buy a subscription of 4.
Yeah.
And bring 2 other people every time you go who maybe wouldn't have gone otherwise. And maybe they'll hate the show. Maybe they'll never come back. Maybe, that's it. But maybe they'll fall in love with it themselves, right?
Yeah.
When you buy tickets, make a donation on top of it. Because when you buy your ticket, it covers a fraction of the cost of what you're experiencing across the board, whether you're going to the opera company or whether you're going to a community theater thing. It won't cover the cost. So make a donation on top of it if you're able to. Take your kids or your neighbors or your family to outdoor free events. Get out on the weekends. Don't just go shopping. Get out and go to the park or the plaza or wherever free things are happening and be in community and see things. Go to your art galleries. Of course, the big, beautiful art galleries, and many of them have free nights or free days. So go then, or if you can pay. But go to the small galleries too. There are all kinds of artist-run centers, artist-run galleries. You can easily look them up and find them. Go and see the show that's on right now. And maybe you won't have a clue what they're doing, but usually there's an artist or a docent or someone there. And you can say, what is this? Because you need to develop your own appreciation. You can't expect, it's the same when you go to a restaurant. You might, what is this? Someone tells you what it is and why they're doing it and lets you into it. If you do know any artists, support them, encourage them. If they're having openings, go to the openings.
These are all
encourage them. And then if you're a business owner, you should consider how either in your community or in the larger sense, how you're supporting through cash, and through marketing partnerships, and through access to space, and how you're engaging your employees and what's going on in your local community in the arts and culture world, so that you're a champion for it. Because what we do, we create all of this stuff. What we like more than anything is for people to show up.
Absolutely, right? You create all this,
and when they don't show up, we're crushed. So you could show up.
And I appreciate that about showing up, because there are costs, even when there are free events, it's usually subsidized so that it can be enabled, right? And
Absolutely.
Showing up by metrics, if you have to prove, this was something that benefited people, because the bodies of the people who show up help enable more events to happen.
You're right.
Right? The investment that happens with Luminato, for instance, an all-night event. I'm sure that it's how many people use the TTC, or how many people use the system or visited and came to these events and venues, so that there's a sense of how do you evaluate or measure the success of something. So I think that's something that's important. And the free events are so important because there is privilege associated with paying $30 a ticket to something. Right. And so the more we show up to things free, or pay what you can is something that we can generate support.
Exactly.
One of the things that you and I had a conversation about was a term that you used that I thought was so interesting, social acupuncture. Can you talk about social acupuncture and how it can be a catalyst for change?
Right. It's not my term. I didn't create it.
But I love
Others have said it. Cultural acupuncture or experiential acupuncture. The idea is that if you want to change the rhythm, if you want to change how a body feels, if you have, and you can't sort of do a panacea across every area. Let's, in this case, the body of the region of Toronto. What are you doing? What are the hot spots that you're doing that in doing it, you sort of spread the heat?
Yeah.
And if you've ever had acupuncture, it's, you go in and you're like, and they know where to put those pricks just in the right spot. And it might feel uncomfortable. And then the heat radiates. And days later, you feel different as a result, right? It's not even in the moment. It's actually, there's a residual effect of it. So when we were at Artscape, when we would look at, we're doing hubs and housing like this around the city, we couldn't blanket the city. We could never deal with the demand of the affordability that people needed. But what we were trying to do was actually put it in places that they would have some kind of a spreading effect. So I think that's an interesting idea. And if you look at the hubs that exist through Artscape, through the United Way, through the local arts service organizations, that's what they're trying to do. So when you see stuff in the storefront along, Eglinton or Danforth or whatever, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to create a little bit of heat right there. And if you support and participate, you'll be part of that heat. And then how could it spread? So I think it's a really interesting idea. It also comes back to the feeling of your own power.
Yeah.
That, I couldn't possibly deal with the 8 million people living in this wider region. I can't actually talk to 8 million people.
Yeah.
But maybe if I locate myself in Brampton or Mississauga or Scarborough or downtown and heat enough, maybe something will happen. A festival, we happen in June, through the course of June, all over the place. It doesn't happen year round. I can't run this year round.
No,
that's not the idea of it.
No.
The idea is you run it in June and you raise the heat. So what is the residual effect of that? What happens as a result? So a mall was there in June. This art intervention, what happened to all those little kids that were part of that later? And now as she walks across America, are there residual effects here? As we look at the state of the world and our own feelings of empathy and compassion, is there any residual effect from what we did in June?
Yeah.
I can't claim credit for everything or very much, but I can claim credit for a little. Yeah. That maybe that did shift things a little bit in some people's hearts. Yeah.
And I think that's why, I really wanted to have this conversation with you, because when we look at our city and we look at the challenges that exist, it is not one sector alone which will be the change that will make everything better. But it is about having the experience or that empathy of okay, what can we do? And just an openness or curiosity to try something different.
Yeah.
And to come together. And this is one of the things that I feel you have in your career path and as a human being exemplified. Let's bring different people to the table. Create, even with Artscape, you were the doer. You took with Tim Jones, the vision, and bringing people together to say, okay, we need to create that little heat in this one little pocket in this community.
Right.
And I always felt, oh man, that's so cool. Toronto's so awesome, because there's a mindset that we have to create spaces for artists, because in seeing the gentrification, we're losing artists, but Artscape was really a place of bringing people together and creating a space for community. Mm-hmm. And, obviously, as we had talked about, there's a challenge with Artscape right now. Hopefully there are people coming together to find a way to save it. And I believe that Toronto will bring people together. But in that vision of bringing it together, it didn't just happen overnight.
No, these things take a long time, I think when you talk about the sort of different parties at the table, you kind of think about, there's the public sector, which has the ability to change the laws. If they don't want us to do something, they can change a law. Or if they want us to do something, they have the policy ability to incent us to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's very powerful. But those are long-term powers. But we vote them in, and as soon as we vote them in, we start carping about how much we don't like them. So we actually don't back them long enough to actually have the impact, because some of the things that they should do for us will be painful to us because we like the way things are right now. Thank you very much. Even though ultimately it doesn't really work for us. Yeah. And then in the private sector, they're ultimately bottom line focused. That's how they get evaluated. That's where the money goes. And yet, if they're not participants in the community and in what's going on in the larger sense, they're going to have challenges with their employees and with their customers and with their ability to actually flourish and meet their bottom line objectives. And then the community sector, which is in charge of taking care of all of us, health, education, arts and culture, social services, the environment. That's actually the most important piece, to actually take care of all of us and our welfare, under-resourced and overlooked. So it's only when you look at the three and sort of these three pillars and the strength that each of them have.
Yeah.
And how you could actually connect them. How is it that innovation in the social services sector could support what's going on in the public sector, and how could corporate get behind that?
Yeah.
And that's that sort of mindset. And I think in arts and culture, we're a place for people to practice those kinds of partnerships. Practice like, oh, I get it. If I support financially something that's going on in the community, I can see the results. I can see who's attending. I can see the good things that happen. Maybe if I practice this on a larger scale with my corporate objectives, we could actually push all of this. So that's sort of my larger interest, really.
Yeah.
And I look at, I live in the city. I've always lived here. So my purview is the city, though you could talk about the province, you could talk about the country or the world, that until we kind of figure out that we're all in this together, and we're all going down together.
Yeah.
Unless,
absolutely.
And it's not like, oh, they'll deal with that. I'm doing my own thing over here and I'm good. It's actually, you're not good. You're actually all in this together. And there's some great examples, unfortunately, in the world that we're facing today that remind us about this. So until we kind of get our heads into this, and I think this experience in personal experiences that change our hearts through arts and culture experiences, that's the way to sort of demonstrate the potential. I'm not saying it's the full extent, but it's a way to start that. So we're interested in talking to people that are working in all sectors.
Yeah. And I see that, like, I see you as a change maker. I see you as a community builder. And I think as I want our city to grow and thrive as we face real challenges, what's the secret sauce? Like, that's the question I have in my mind. Like, talking with people from every sector, like, what would be of interest to you to come to the table to help be a part of that change and to meet your objectives as well, whether it's like from an economic perspective, from a government perspective, from a community perspective. So it's a part of, how do we bring people together and just everything that you have shared about in your experiences is reaching outside of that box.
Right. Well, I think there's so many great examples of it happening right now. Like, do not lose heart.
Yeah.
They're great examples.
Absolutely. No, that's why you're
happening.
There's great examples.
Right now, around the city where you got to go, oh, that's so good that's going on. And if we could just make it a little bit wider or broader, that would be amazing. So, for example, we joined forces with Pride and with fix your hair, Lee.
Okay, got it.
It's distracting our home audience.
Yeah.
We joined forces with Pride Toronto, with Caribbean Carnival, and with Salsa on St. Clair a couple of years ago in the pandemic, because we all felt, look, we're all festivals trying to get people out in the streets, and we collectively bring millions of people out into the streets to celebrate things in the summer in Toronto, and also bring people from away to Toronto to experience what we're all doing. We have more in common than we have separately. And we had not successfully worked together before.
Yeah.
And we hadn't really even talked to each other before. And those organizations are run by terrific people who are trying to do the same thing that we're doing. So just by nature of us just meeting, that was something. Yeah. And then we realized, oh my God, maybe we could actually all source fencing together or porta potties or whatever. But also could we share stories and support of each other? And we could cross promote, and maybe we'll cross program. And as a result, we are more powerful as a voice together than we are separately. So I think that's a great example. And you could expand that. I was at an event that Mayor Chow hosted the other night, thanking all the festivals across the city. There were hundreds of people in the room. There are hundreds of arts and culture festivals across this region. And what if we actually all did things together? What would that do? Every night of the week, there'd be something going on. It's happening already, but we're doing it separately. Yeah. What if we actually noticed that we were all doing it and thought about what the potential was. I think that's really powerful.
So how do we do that? Like, if you were to give advice, like I know you are an expert networker, you have strong connections, but if someone's just starting out, what's the advice that you would give them to build those connections or to, I notice you.
Yeah.
Like, let's talk.
Yeah. I think, well, this started because we just called each other. It was the pandemic. We were all trying to run these things in the pandemic. You'd plan and plan and then you'd cancel. Then you'd plan and plan and cancel. So we were all having this experience. And I think it was just out of that desperation, we started calling each other and going, how are you doing over there? Yeah. What's going on with you guys?
Such a simple human piece.
You see someone, maybe you see someone on a panel and you go, wow, I really love what that person just said. Send them a note through LinkedIn and say, I just saw you on that panel. That was really amazing.
Absolutely.
And can I be your friend? Will you talk to me for half an hour, right? Just try to do that. And everyone will say yes to you. Everyone will say, absolutely, I'd love to talk to you for half an hour.
You just got to try, right?
You just got to try it. If you don't because if you're just going to do it by yourself, you're going to have very limited success and you're going to get sad because it's lonely by yourself. And if you have a couple of other people who are doing it, at least you can go, oh my God, this is so hard and impossible. That makes you feel better and you keep going. The other thing I was going to say is there are also great examples of this public-private community sector work happening. I don't know if you're familiar with what's happening on the Golden Mile right now. You should look it up.
Yeah, look it up. It's really cool.
It's incredible. United Way, several really fabulous developers, private developers, the city's involved, lots of community organizations. How can we build a community, rebuild a community, work with the community that's already there and envision something new in that Golden Mile area? And this is a long-term, multiple-year action. And as a result of what they're doing, there's employment. Yeah. There's space for community. There's future community economic development. There's arts and culture. It's just a really thoughtful way to reignite an area of the city and use what's there and build it further. So imagine that in communities all over the place.
Absolutely. I mean, the Golden Mile for a long time was just it was there.
Yeah.
Right. And the mall that was there. I mean, even local people knew, like super hyper local, but information, but the ramp to get into the parking was like not in use, in disarray, right? And it was like marked off. And it really mattered to the people locally and like what's happening. But now there's all these players coming together to, hey, give us some input about what we need to do for this community.
Right.
So I don't know what happened on the inside, but how did that happen, materialize with all these players coming together? Like, we know it's happening, but how did that magic sauce happen?
I wasn't there at the table for that, so I can't speak about Golden Mile specifically, but I will say that some of the other examples, like the redevelopment of Regent Park, no doubt influenced the approach.
Yes.
Because none of these approaches are perfect. You learn things through and you kind of go, oh, if we'd known that, then we would have done that differently.
Exactly.
And that didn't work out for these individuals. And you learn stuff. And no doubt what happened in Regent Park, much of it amazing, will have influenced what's happening in the Golden Mile. And some of the players are the same players.
Mm-hmm. So they brought that experience to the table. Like, okay, what we did in Regent Park, how do we change that here?
I mean, in Regent Park, when we went in as Artscape, we had gone through a process. We were selected to facilitate the building of this arts and culture center in the redevelopment of Regent Park because Toronto Community Housing had determined they were going to tear down all the current buildings because they hadn't been kept up. Yeah. And the community was isolated from the larger city and there were no services. Yeah. There was really nowhere to gather. There was no grocery store. There was it was just lacking in services and it was cut off. So that had been a decision that happened long before our time. But as part of it, they realized that having athletic facilities, a park, retail services, and an arts and culture center and among other things, were part of the future of Regent Park. And so we went through a process. We were selected as a proponent to help facilitate this. So working with the community, with the developer, Daniels Corp, led by Mitchell Cohen, who's very vocal about his interest in this kind of approach to development, and Toronto Community Housing. Yeah. We worked for years on figuring this out and raising the money and figuring out how it would be set up and what was the process to determine which organizations would be in there, what model would we develop to make this space accessible, but also cover its costs. Who would we find in the larger community underwrite some of the programs that would support the kids and their experiences. So it was a long-standing work. And I remember at the beginning when we first met with Toronto Community Housing and Daniels Corp and Artscape, feeling like, oh, the power imbalance in the room, it was palpable. But it wasn't, we worked and worked and worked. And once we figured out that we actually all were equal in the room, because we all had different objectives, Mitchell and his team could build buildings.
Yeah.
And they had access to capital. None of us had that. We could raise money from government and from private. And we knew the arts sector, and we had, some credibility in that. Toronto Community Housing owned the land and was representing all of the residents and their situation. So when we figured that out and built it into the model, we were able to create something, and it's still governed that way. It's still governed in a way where the community and the various proponents are actually still in charge of making sure it delivers what it's supposed to deliver. So I'm just saying there are many great examples around the city, and there are many more that I'm not familiar with, of people from different places coming together and figuring something out. I think there could be so much more, though. I mean, if you sort of write that large, and the issues, for instance, right now that the city is facing, are we just going to sit back and wait for the city to do that? No, the rest of us need to actually contribute to those solutions.
Absolutely. Like, I think that you're right. There is hope. We have great people like you who have the experience, know-how, also bringing people to the table.
Yeah.
So I want to just kind of bring this down to a favorite quote, which you shared. Excuse me. How lucky am I to have something that makes saying goodbye so hard? Talk to me about that quote.
Well, that's a Winnie the Pooh quote, yes. Right? It's at the terrible, tragic end of Winnie the Pooh when Christopher Robin goes off to grade 1, which, of course, is what little kids do. They grow up. Yeah. So then that's a great thing. It's also always breaks your heart, right? Of course, you want them to go and flourish. So I feel that way about all of these projects. Like, we only touch anything for a short time. We're only all here for a short time. Yeah. What are you doing that actually makes a difference? What's your contribution to your family, to your neighborhood, to your community, to the city, to the world? What's your contribution? And have you made such a difference that when you leave that purview, people will feel that way? They'll feel like, I need to actually pick this up because that person did a lot. And now it hurts that they're moving on to something else. I could pick it up, right? Yeah. And so how lucky are we that we have the opportunity to make a difference? Either it's in loving people or in building things or in standing up against things that we don't agree with. How lucky are we? And we should make such an impact that when we're not able to do that anymore or we're moving on to something else, that the world is different and people go, I need to take their shoes. I need to step into that.
Celia, you are an inspiration. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that, because you do create spaces that are so inclusive and make a difference.
Thank you very much. This is fun.
It was awesome. Thanks for checking out this episode. You want to make sure to like, subscribe, and share so that you don't miss out on the next In Focus episode on topics that matter to you.